Welcome back to the Tesla Investment Dialogue series, live from City Television with me, Bernard Avle. Today we're looking at getting clarity in the chaos, what lies ahead for the Ghanaian economy. I'm very privileged to say we have Professor Dennis Nsafoah, an assistant professor of economics, Niagara University. He's our principal presenter. He's joining us all the way from North America. Prof is, if you can hear us, give us a wave so we applaud you. Put your hands together for Prof. Wonderful. We're trying to address the question of where is Ghana's economy on the basis of some 5 fundamental parameters: GDP, debt to GDP, GDP per capita, inflation rate, and currency stability. So our principal speaker will set the scene by analyzing those factors for us. Prof, I gave the context. Reshuffle has happened, new Ministry of Finance. Everybody thinks the election is going to have a big say on where the economy goes. What are your big highlights for us this morning as the baseline for the discussion? Prof, you have the floor.
All right. Thank you, Bernard. I would like to thank Tesla Capital, the management of Tesla Capital, for giving me the opportunity to be a part of this program. My major highlights from what I studied about the Ghanaian economy is that first, I want to acknowledge the fact that the Ghanaian economy has had its own challenges, especially for households and businesses in the last couple of years. However, I have a cautiously optimistic outlook of the Ghanaian economy. I believe that there is hope for 2024-2025. However, this outlook has to be treated with a little bit of caution because there is still significant challenges to the risk of this optimistic outlook. The third thing I would like to also point out is that debt sustainability or debt crisis lies at the heart of Ghana's recent economic crisis. Budget 2024 provides a path by which Ghana can obtain some level of debt sustainability. So these are the 3 main things that I plan to highlight in my discussion.
Go ahead.
Okay. Given that I get the opportunity to analyze the Ghanaian economy, I want to first set the facts straight. I'm going to use data mainly from the IMF, Ministry of Finance, and then the Bank of Ghana. I'll be throwing a lot of numbers to the Ghanaian public. I have 2 main models which I generate my numbers from. My first model is a monetary policy analysis and forecast model. It's some sort of an abstraction of the forecast and policy analysis system used by the Bank of Ghana. And then I'll discuss those debt sustainability in detail. The model I use is a public debt dynamics tool, which the IMF uses, and is DSA analysis. Okay. Turning to the key macroeconomic variables. In the last 2 years, 2022-2023, the Ghanaian economy has had its own challenges. Key macroeconomic variables have performed poorly or have performed less than one would expect. So if you take a variable like GDP growth rate, the real GDP growth rate in 2022 was 3.1%, and then it decreased to 2.3%, which is less than the 5-year average prior to 2022. It is also less than what I call the long-run targets. Now, these long-run targets that I'm showing are either targets from policy choices or from a forecast model. Typically, these long-run targets are what you expect the variables to be when the economy is operating near its optimum. GDP growth rate, one would expect that if everything is going well for the Ghanaian economy, we should register about 5%. 2022-2023 was way less than 5%. Another variable Ghanaians like to discuss, especially in the news media, is the cedi depreciation. 2022, the cedi depreciated by 30%. 2023, the cedi depreciated by about 27.8%. All these values are way higher than what we recorded 5 years prior to 2022-2023. And it's also significantly less than what one would expect the cedi to depreciate at when the economy is operating near optimum. This 6% is mainly coming from policy choices. Ghana has an inflation target of 8%. The US has an inflation target of 2%. Theories suggest that if both economies are operating near optimum, expected depreciation rate should be the difference between those two inflation targets. So that's where I got my 6%. What is my outlook for the Ghanaian economy? Like I earlier indicated, I expect these key macroeconomic variables going into 2024, 2025 to stabilize, if not improve. I don't expect them to reach their long-run targets, but I expect significant improvements. So for example, I expect GDP growth rate to increase in 2024 by about 2.8% and then 4.4% in 2025. I expect the cedi to depreciate, but not as high as it did in 2023. I expect a depreciation rate of 14 and then 18%. Okay. These outlooks, or the outlook or the forecast I'm presenting is founded on some perception that I have about the Ghanaian economy. And one of those key prime perceptions are what I think will be the path of public debt to GDP ratio. So I would discuss public debt to GDP ratio since I have quite a good outlook of public debt to GDP ratio. Currently, Ghana's total debt stands at about 563 billion Ghana cedis. That accounts for about 93.3% of GDP. This value is what we last recorded in 2022. 2023 figure is not officially out yet, but we forecast that the public debt will slightly increase to about 589 billion cedis by the end of 2023. And that would be a debt to GDP ratio of 69%. At this state, Ghana's debt is deemed unsustainable. That's why we went for the IMF program, and that's why we've had all these austerity measures. For the purposes of my analysis, which I'm going to show, I would define debt sustainability as a public debt to GDP ratio of 60%. One would ask, why are you not using the advertised 55%? The 55% that the government has advertised is the present value of debt to GDP ratio. I'm using nominal value. So under simplifying assumptions, one can easily say a nominal debt to GDP ratio target of 60% is equivalent to the 55% advertised by the government. Okay. My question, or my major question, which I would answer in this presentation, is how Budget 2024 has addressed the issue of debt sustainability. In Budget 2024, the government highlighted some policies, including the domestic debt exchange. So in my baseline scenario, I consider all the policies highlighted in the Budget 2024, but I exclude the ongoing external debt restructuring. When I consider the government policies, I forecast or I project the path of public debt to GDP ratio. And the forecast indicates that we still fail or we fall short of our target, even by 2027. And that's a big challenge. Why am I optimistic then? There is a path by which we can meet our target, and that path is the external debt restructuring. Currently, the government is negotiating about $10.5 billion worth of debt relief. In my analysis, I don't use a relief worth $10.5 billion. I define success as the government being able to achieve 80% of that target. So if the government can achieve 80%, then we can achieve the target of 60% debt to GDP ratio. So 60%, 80% of the external debt relief would really enhance debt sustainability in Ghana, or it would retain public debt to sustainable path. Since I see, or since I have, I see a path by which debt returns to sustainable levels, I want to go into details to explain how the government or the strategies the government is using to achieve this debt sustainability, and then also share my views on those strategies. There are four main strategies the government is using to achieve this path of debt sustainability. The first is more borrowing. The second is restructuring our current debt. The third is pursuing fiscal consolidation. And then the fourth, which I'll talk a lot more about, is monetizing the debt by issuing more cedis to inflate away the debt. The first strategy, more borrowing. This, in my opinion, is the second most sustainable way to manage fiscal debt. Unfortunately, Ghana lost access to international debt market or international capital market late 2021. And as a result, the government has been restricted to borrowing from domestic market, specifically using treasury bills. In 2023, approximately 50 billion cedis was raised through the money market, which covers about 68% of government financing needs. I expect borrowing from the treasury market to continue in 2024 and 2025. However, I still believe that the government can successfully secure the funds they need from the treasury bill market, mainly because of two reasons. Ghanaians have a strong demand for treasury bills, and then the debt sustainability, the domestic debt exchange did not cover the treasury bill market. So there is some level of confidence in the treasury bill market. That's why it can serve as a successful means for the government to keep financing its operations. The second, debt restructuring. A lot has been said about debt restructuring. The domestic debt restructuring is projected to yield about $8 billion worth of debt relief. The government is also in negotiation to get about 10.5 billion in external debt relief. What's my view of these debt restructuring? I think, as I earlier indicated in my debt sustainability analysis, relief from external debt plays a crucial factor to secure the path of debt sustainability. I dare say that without relief from this external debt, there is no way we can achieve debt sustainability. And then the third, which ideally should be the strategy every government should use to finance its debt, fiscal consolidation. Fiscal consolidation often comes in two forms, either reducing government spending or increasing government revenue. Budget 2024 tells us that the government is actually pursuing fiscal consolidation, but it is sort of skewed. One would realize from the budget that the government is maintaining expenditure as a fraction of debt to GDP ratio across the entire forecast horizon. Expenditure as a fraction of GDP in 2023 is about 21.5%, and we expect it to remain consistent and later fall to about 20.5%. However, if we look at the revenue side, the other side of the equation, we see quite a significant upward trend. The government is looking for ways to raise revenues. I'm not saying it's a bad strategy. We have heard all the different revenue measures the government has put across. It is great. However, I believe that a better approach to ensuring fiscal consolidation would have been a more balanced approach. Reduce government spending a little bit whilst you enhance or whilst you increase the revenue side of the equation. The fourth approach, which I think has not been spoken a lot on, is how the government has inflated the debt away. We all know what Bank of Ghana has done for the fiscal authorities, or the role the Bank of Ghana has played since the government lost access to international debt market. Bank of Ghana in 2022, 2023, financed fiscal spending. It's estimated that between those 2 years, Bank of Ghana financed about 100 billion Ghana cedis worth of the deficit. In as much as that is key, I personally believe the largest contribution of Bank of Ghana in the path where I see fiscal debt sustainability is the role inflation has played. Okay. Now let's look at the numbers. Public debt to GDP ratio in 2022 is 93.3%. We expect it to be about 69% in 2023. Nominal public debt is 56.7 billion Ghana cedi. 2023, we are expecting it to increase slightly, 589.4 billion Ghana cedi. All right, so the numerator is not changing as much. However, the denominator, which is nominal GDP, 2022 is 610 billion Ghana cedi. 2023, we are expecting a nominal GDP of 850 billion Ghana cedi. Well, that is approximately 40% increase in GDP growth rate. all things being equal, this should be celebrated, right? In regular times, you should celebrate a GDP growth rate of 40%, but not in this case. It turns out that real GDP growth is roughly 2.3% of that value. The remaining value, that is about 37%, is coming from the GDP deflator. Now, GDP deflator may not be a common variable discussed in news media in Ghana, but it is some price level we use GDP deflator to measure inflation. Okay. That means that inflation is anticipated to decrease the public debt to GDP ratio by 23 percentage points, right? So with inflation, we have just wiped off our debt. This strategy we're expecting to continue because the government is projecting another nominal GDP of about 1 trillion mark. I know it's been talked about where the GDP hits 1 trillion. Yeah, GDP is going to hit 1 trillion, but a large component of that growth is from inflation. My personal view is that monetizing the debt has been the most effective way the government has achieved, or the government has set this public debt into sustainable path. However, in my opinion, it is the most harmful strategy to households and businesses, particularly affecting low-income groups due to the way monetary policy works. It disproportionately affects low-income groups. I haven't had time to actually study in detail the effect of this episode of inflation on Ghanaian households and businesses. This year, that is something I would really love to do. I see the benefit of this inflation. The benefit of this inflation is that we are set on a path of debt sustainability. But at what cost? How is this going to affect Ghanaian businesses, and how is this going to affect Ghanaian households? I think it's going to be extremely harmful. It's not going to be desirable, and I would really love to know the direct impact to actually tell if it was worth it, the benefit of achieving debt sustainability, if it was worth the cost that the inflation is going to do to Ghanaian households and businesses. Now let me answer the question. Has the economy turned the corner? The finance minister named 2024 budget as Nkunim budget, and I think the finance minister had every right to name that, the budget Nkunim. He was right when he said he sees that the economy has turned the corner. In my opinion, by reading budget 2024, I saw a path by which fiscal authorities can return public debt to sustainable levels. That is victory on its own. So I say, indeed, budget 2024 was victory for the fiscal authorities. But the real question is it really victory for Ghanaian households and businesses? Well, I doubt that. The reason I doubt that is Ghanaian households and businesses have and will continue to pay a huge price for this victory that fiscal authorities are going to see. Next issue, let's talk about Bank of Ghana. Bank of Ghana has played a pivotal role in steering public debt towards sustainable trajectories. However, central bank's success is not measured by its ability to return public debt to sustainable levels. Central bank's measure of success is by its mandate of price stability. Price stability, in my opinion, is very essential for macroeconomic stability. For every economy like the Ghanaian economy, price stability is the bedrock of the economy. Bank of Ghana officially adopted inflation targeting regime in 2022. By that, they defined an inflation target of CPI inflation of between 6 to 10%. My question in this section is, how has Bank of Ghana actually performed in fulfilling its mandate since it adopted the inflation targeting regime? Bank of Ghana's mandate, remember, it's not a debt metrics. It is to ensure that inflation is in target. So I analyzed inflation data from 1982 to 2023. Inflation targeting was adopted in 2002. since inflation targeting was adopted, one could see that there has been some level of stability in the path of inflation. I'm not saying this is purely because of the inflation targeting, but we have to acknowledge that inflation has been relatively more stable since we adopted inflation targeting. But how has inflation performed with respect to the target Bank of Ghana has set for themselves? In that regard, I would say we have had modest success. Of the 260 months since we started inflation targeting, we have only been able to achieve an inflation within the target band about 54% of the time. That is roughly 21%. 21% success rate, in my opinion, is just modest. What then should we do? I think after 20 years of practicing inflation targeting and the fact that we've seen modest success, this is time for Bank of Ghana to critically review their price stability mandate. Bank of Ghana should actually review their price. The MPP government in 2002 switched from monetary aggregate targeting to inflation targeting because they felt that we could not hit the target of monetary growth which we were set for ourselves. So the reason why we switched from one regime to another regime was because we were not observing the target we set for ourselves. Well, after 20 years, we have not been hitting the target too. So we have to critically analyze the regime and then possibly consider alternatives. There are tons of alternatives that the Bank of Ghana can consider. They can consider raising the inflation target. They can consider reducing the inflation target. They can even switch to target nominal GDP. They can adopt what the US does, a dual mandate, or they can go back to the old way of conducting price stability, which is monetary aggregate targeting. Another option available to them is to keep what they have, maintain the status quo. But if they are keeping what they have to go back to basics. They have to make sure that they fulfill all the prerequisites needed for an inflation targeting regime to be successful, which is maintaining central bank independence, eliminating fiscal dominance, which we don't see in the Ghanaian economy. But I think that wherever the incoming government is, price stability mandate of Bank of Ghana is something they have to critically analyze and review. Okay. I would end my discussion by talking about elections, outcomes, and macroeconomic performance. Since we are in an election year, it is only right for us to talk about elections. To do this, I take 5 main macroeconomic variables: real GDP growth, real GDP per capita growth rate, the average inflation rate, public debt to GDP ratio, and then the exchange rate, or the rate at which the cedi has depreciated. A common sentiment often suggests that economic performance of the country is contingent on who is at the helm of affairs. Does the NPP perform, or does an MPP-led administration perform better than an NDC-led administration in terms of economic outlook or in terms of economic performance? Well, this should no longer be anecdotal evidence. We have enough data from 1992 to actually empirically provide support for whatever our perception is. So I did just that. I analyzed the data for these 5 variables, depending on who was in charge of the administration. And then my overarching conclusion is that I find insufficient evidence to support the claim that one party economic performance is superior to another party's economic performance. The details are, when we consider real GDP growth rate, there was no statistically significant difference between the NPP and the NDC. Per capita growth rate, no statistical significant difference. Average inflation, no statistical difference. Public debt to GDP ratio, no statistical difference. Where the only variable I saw a statistically significant difference was the cedi depreciation rate. And it turns out that in the years in which NPP has been at the helm of affairs, the cedi has actually performed better than in the years in which the NDC had. being at the helm of affairs. But regardless, this does not conclusively support the fact that one party has been superior compared to another party. All right. Thank you very much, and I think I was within time.